Let's animate your very first walk cycle in Blender. What I'm about to show you is the complete 1-hour lecture from the beginner section of our Ultimate Animation course. This lesson will be recorded by Simona, not me. She's the co-founder of Animate Academy, and she most recently worked on Marvel's Ant-Man Quantumania. So I'd be taking out my notebooks if I were you. Now, before I let you jump into the lesson, there's 5 small steps that we gotta do to set up your file so that there's no hiccups while you're following along. Step 1, download Blender. You can head over to blender.org and make sure to download Blender 4 or higher. Step 2. If you don't have the ToAnimate bot rig already, don't worry, just go to toanimate.ca, press free rig up here, put in your information, and click download to get the download link. Now that you have the rig, you'll notice that there's also a zip file inside. This is ToAnimate's UI add-on, which is something we've developed for Blender 4 and above. You only need to install this once by going to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, Install, and once you locate the add-on, just click on it and install add-on. It will then appear right here, which then you can check mark it. And for the future, you can check for updates every once in a while to make sure that it's up to date. So you never have to install this again, you just do it once, and it will work with any ToAnimate rig. It'll automatically give you access to a ton of options right here on the side panel, allowing you to hide and unhide controllers, gives you access to special properties like the light brightness, head follow, different eye shapes, blinking, and the list goes on. Number 4, download the free resources for this lesson so that you can follow along. And you can do that right where you downloaded the rig. You just scroll a little bit farther down, you can see the lesson right here, and all you have to do is press download resources. With the lesson, you'll get our exercise file with the preset layout we use in the lesson. To make sure that the exercise file loads correctly, open up a fresh Blender, head over to Edit, Preferences, Save and Load, and make sure that Load UI is checked. You want to make sure this is checked because this tells Blender to use the UI of the file that you're opening instead of your own UI. In this case, you want the UI of our exercise file, so you leave this as checked. As part of the free resources, you'll also be getting a handy PDF guide that highlights all the key points talked about in the lesson. This is something we give to all of our animation students under every video lesson. And lastly, number 5. Let's append the ToAnimate bot rig into the exercise file so you can start the lesson. Go to File, Append, locate the rig. I'm going to go ahead and open it up. Go to Collection and click ToAnimate Robot. Append, and here we go. If your robot shows up without any textures, just go up here and change color to texture. And there you go. Now you can click the rig, go into pose mode, and follow along with the lesson. So just to quickly recap, all we've done is we've downloaded the free ToAnimate bot rig, we've installed the rig UI add-on, downloaded the free resources on the website, and have appended our rig into the exercise file. And with that, I'll hand it over to Simona. Best of luck.
Hi guys, in today's lesson, we're gonna do our first ever walk cycle. And if you wanna be an animator, this is something you have to be able to do in your sleep. So we're going to make sure to start simple and work our way up slowly in complexity. Now, there are 2 ways to approach animating a walk. First is your typical walk across the screen, where the character moves forward with every step, which is the more proper way of doing it from my experience. You'll almost always be required to do this type of walk in an animated production. But the second way is a treadmill walk, and that's where a character is walking in place and the feet slide back and forth in a looping action. This is something you can use in like a game animation or just to practice animating different walks quicker, so that's what we'll do today. In future lessons, we'll also explore doing different personality walks with the character actually moving across the screen, so don't worry, you will learn to do those too. But today, we'll just do a basic vanilla walk on a treadmill, which is a great way to learn the mechanics. We'll be focusing on the main 4 poses involved in any biped walk, and those are the contact pose, the down, the passing position, and the up position. Here we have a really handy image guide, which comes from the famous book called The Animator's Survival Kit. If you're looking into getting any additional animation resources, we really recommend getting this book. And let's also look at a real-life walk cycle reference and try to identify these poses. So here's our walk cycle reference video. Obviously it's slowed down to like maybe half speed, but that doesn't matter. So let's pause it and scrub through it to see if we can find those poses. I would say somewhere around here where the front heel touches the ground. This would be the contact position. Both feet are the same distance from the center of gravity, which is the midsection of the body. And the front heel is off the ground and the back heel is off the ground as well. So we're not really gonna be animating arms today, but you can see that in a real walk cycle, the arms and the legs are reversed. So here the right leg is in the back, but the right arm is in the front and vice versa. Now moving on after the stride, somewhere around here we have the down position. So you can see his midsection was higher here, now the drops and the knee bends, and now the full foot is on the ground. So instead of just the heel, it's the full foot, and the other foot is leaving the ground. And then we continue, and around here we can see the passing position. So the character will be standing on just one leg. Their full weight is on that one leg. You can see it on this right side as well. And the other leg is just passing to the front to catch his weight. And somewhere around here we have the up position, and keep in mind that in a real human walk these poses are not as exaggerated as in our example here, where the character is fully on his tippy toes, really high up, the foot is really high and dragging behind with the toes. In real life it will be a lot more subtle, but we're doing animation, so we're gonna be trying to push the poses to be more cartoony and interesting. But anyways, you can see the foot is slowly lifting off the ground in the back, and his center of gravity is going up as well, and the foot is swinging forward. The heel is getting ready to hit the ground. Around here we have the other stride position. So the legs have reversed now. Obviously the right leg was in the back before, now it's in the front. The right arm is in the back now, and he's ready to take the next step, where you can see it reversing again. So this is how much we're gonna be doing today. We're gonna start with one stride, then the second stride, and then back to the first stride. Once the same leg hits the ground again, we're just gonna loop the animation and it's gonna look like he's walking forward. Another thing to notice if we're gonna be looking at this right hand image is that whenever his weight is on one leg, the whole body shifts to that side, right? Because if the body continued having all of its weight in the center, he would basically fall over right now. So just watch as I scrub. The weight goes to the right, now the weight goes to the left, to the right again, to the left. So up and down and left and right, that's basically the main motion of the midsection of the body. Okay, so let's talk about timing now. There are two different types of timing that I generally use. There's the standard 25 frame walk, which is more brisk and energetic, and it makes the character look like they're walking with a purpose. I personally like keeping my numbers even, so I mark the first pose on frame 0, and from frame 0 to frame 12, it's a total of 13 frames per step. And then the second half is also 13 frames because this middle stride pose is included on both sides. So 0 to 12 is 13 frames, and then 12 to 24 is also 13 frames if we include this pose in it. And this is actually the type of walk we'll be animating today. The second type is what I call a casual stroll, and in this walk the character walks a lot slower. They're not in a rush to get anywhere, just enjoying their day. And this one will be 17 frames per step, so from frame 0 to frame 32, or if you like to start from frame 1, it would be frame 1 to frame 33. And we included the timing guide for both types of walk in the PDF, so feel free to refer to it as needed. Okay, so now we're ready to start animating. I set up this file for you so we can see our character from the 3/4 view, which is our camera view right here. And then we see the side view, and then we have our perspective view, which we'll also be using as our front view if you click on this -Y button right here. And when you're animating a walk, all of these angles are actually really important, so otherwise the walk is not really gonna look good. So like I said, I like starting on frame 0 so that my numbers are even, but if you want, you can start on frame 1 and then just shift everything by one frame. So of course I'm gonna select the whole character in pose mode, and I'm gonna press I to get a key on my first frame, or my frame 0. And we have this handy guide for our walk cycle timing today. I added it because there's gonna be a lot of copy and pasting poses from one side to the other, and it always takes me a second or so to figure out like, oh, the passing position on one side is on frame 6 and then on the other side it's frame 18. So it's just easier to look at this guide and not have to think about it, especially when you're starting out. Okay, so as we know, our first pose is gonna be the stride pose, which is the contact pose. It's the same thing, just different names for it, and this is kind of the shape of the pose. So what we need to do is grab one foot and push it forward, and then we're also gonna rotate this controller here to lift the toes off the ground. And you can see the leg is being very overextended here and kind of stretching when the toes are on the ground, but it gets a lot better when the toes are off the ground. And of course, continue looking at the side view as well, especially for this type of pose, and make sure that the angle of the foot looks nice. Also for this stride pose or the contact pose, feel free to grab the torso controller and just bring it slightly lower than the default, just so you can push the stride to be a little bit wider. And then we also need to push the right foot backwards. Now, if I just eyeball it, it's not gonna look that great once I loop it. It's gonna feel like the character limps and one step is always shorter than the other. And for this basic vanilla walk, I just want them to be equal. And the way to do that is very easy actually. I'm gonna go to my first foot, press N, and under item, I have this location transform. And I know that I'm doing the y-axis here, which is the green one. And this is the value that I'm getting. So I'm gonna grab the value, press Ctrl C, click on the other foot, I'm gonna paste the value, and instead of making a negative, I'm gonna just delete the minus to make it positive, and the foot is gonna be exactly the same distance from the center line of the body as the left foot. And this is because we're exactly where the X and the Y axis meet, so it works well for us. And now I'm gonna bring the heel up on this pose as well. And one more thing when you're animating strides is you want to be rotating the hips as well. Because the left foot is more in the front and the right foot is in the back, you want the hips to follow that a little bit. Now, if you're animating a typical feminine walk, you will have more rotation on the hips. And if you want to do something more masculine or something more neutral, you just want to do it a little bit. So you don't want to go too crazy with it. And I'm just gonna do this much. If you want, you can bring the torso controller just slightly lower because you don't want the knees to be overextending and stretching because that causes pops in the animation. So just have them like either just very neutral or just slightly bent for now. And we'll be adjusting that a little bit later, but this is what looks good to me. So the legs will always be affecting the hips and you have to animate them together and think about them together as one unit. Now we know that the second stride will be happening on frame 12 and then on frame 24 we will have the same exact pose we have now. So what I can do is grab the whole character and I already have a key here on frame 0. So I'm gonna Ctrl C or you can Shift D to duplicate, drag that same key onto frame 24. And now we can actually also shorten our timeline to just 24 frames because we don't need any of those frames that come after. And like I said, there's gonna be a lot of mirror pasting on this walk or any walk that you're gonna be animating. So I can also Ctrl C that first pose and then on frame 12, I know there's a second stride and I can do Ctrl Shift and V. So now my pose has flipped and now the character's feet are shifting from one pose to the next. If I play it, you'll see it. So this is the base for our walk cycle and everything else is going to be happening within this time range. And we haven't really talked about this much yet, but instead of animating in splines, which means we have these nice curves that the computer is creating for us wherever we don't have keys, we're actually going to be working in stepped. So that means I'm going to select all of my keys and make sure my channels are selected and also all of my keys in the graph editor. And I'll press T and instead of Bezier, which is what we have now, I'm gonna change that to constant. Now, what happens is that my key is gonna be held on all of these frames and then it's gonna change only when there's another key. And then this one is gonna be held and it's gonna change again once there is another key. And this is actually very helpful for a lot of different animation workflows, especially when you're just starting out and trying to figure out the movement. You don't want to be confused by what the computer is giving you. You want to create your own poses, and this makes it a lot easier to read your animation. And then everything should already be keyed on frame 24, but I'm still gonna make sure it is. And what we can do at this point, if we want to, is create a loop. So we've done this before, just hovering over the graph editor with still every single key selected. I'm gonna press Shift E and make cyclic. And you don't really need to do this because our animation is gonna be just 24 frames and it's always gonna go back to the first frame. But if you wanna continue scrubbing after the first pose, like we did before in some other animations, then maybe having it on a cyclic modifier is gonna help you. And now, of course, because our animation is 24 frames, we just want to shorten the timeline to 23 frames. Now our file is nicely prepped. We have our kind of anchor poses on our first and the last frame, and we have our loop. We've also figured out the base for our stride poses on both feet. And eventually, we're also going to add the animation on the head and on all these accessories like the antennas and the lights and also these little arms, but we're gonna keep that for after we've figured out our torso, hips, and our legs, because those are the most important parts of any walk cycle, and especially on a character like this that basically doesn't really have arms. We want to focus on this lower part. Okay, so after the contact or the stride pose, the next thing you want to do is what's exactly between them, and that's the passing or the crossover position. And you can see that that's this red pose here with one foot fully planted on the ground and below the body holding all of its weight, and the second foot is fully off the ground and passing from the back to the front. So we're going to go to frame 6 where our crossover position happens. And the easiest thing you can do as a starting point for shaping this pose is finding the perfect center. And the way you can do that easily is, again, having everything selected and hovering over the viewport, press Shift E, and then once you get this sliding bar, you want to go to exactly 50% and then confirm. And the pose doesn't look good right now, but you know that it's the exact middle and the foot that the character is standing on is exactly below the character. And this is important because the one rule of animating a character on a treadmill is that when the foot is planted on the ground, it has to move in a linear fashion where it's not slowing down or speeding up at any point. It's always exactly 50% between the key on the left and the key on the right. You're gonna see it better once we have more keys, but just try to remember that. So for us right now, the foot that's gonna be on the ground is gonna be the screen right foot, if you can see that, because the character is going from having the foot in the front, and now normally the body would be moving forward, but because we have a treadmill, the foot just moves backwards. And of course, the character is bent down a little bit, so we're just gonna grab the torso and move him up until he's pretty much straight. Maybe there can be a slight bend in the knee so he's not overextending the knee. But this looks good for now. And this left foot is gonna be off the ground now. So let's lift it up. And to rotate the heel and the foot, you could either use the same controller here, or you can use this heel controller. And I like using that because we're also using that heel controller to lift the heel and the toes off the ground. So I don't want to make my animation convoluted and hard to fix by having too many controllers doing the same thing. If this controller and this controller gives me similar results, I'm just gonna continue using this heel IK controller because it's easier. I'm gonna bring it down, and now because it lifts my foot off the ground quite a lot, maybe I can just bring that foot controller lower. And so this is what I'm getting right now. The other thing we talked about is the transfer of weight from left to right. So now that the character has all of his weight on his screen right foot, we have to shift the weight to the right as well. And you can keep it subtle if you want to. Again, if you were animating like a stereotypically super feminine walk with lots of hip sway, you might want to move the torso more left and right. But here we're just gonna keep it subtle. And the next thing you want to remember is always animating the hips. So right now, because the feet are pretty much at the same level on the x-axis, the hips are not really going to have any left and right rotation. So the y is pretty much at 0. But whenever one foot is holding all of the weight, that's when that hip goes up. That's just what happens in real life. The weight of the body is pushing down because of gravity, but the straight leg is holding it up. So this angle happens. So you always want to have that. And again, you can keep it subtle. You don't have to go too crazy. You can always make it more, or you can make it less later. But the thing is with walk cycles is that everything affects everything. So if you start changing things a lot later, then you're gonna be doing a lot of reanimating. So you wanna get kind of close to what you're already thinking of having in your final. But of course, I'm gonna be adjusting things, you're gonna be adjusting, it's normal. So don't be too stressed about it. Anything you do, you can fix later. And we want to make sure this heel controller is zeroed out completely. Right now there's a little bit of rotation. So since the character is fully standing on his leg, it's not really possible for him to be lifting his toes off the ground without like falling over or changing his center of gravity. So that's good. We have the feet where we need them to be. We animated the hips going up and down, zeroed out the side-to-side motion. This foot is off the ground and the toes are dragging behind. So let's just leave that for now. And I'm gonna, again, grab the whole pose by pressing A. I like to double check, make sure that everything is keyed, so I'm gonna key it again. Now I'm gonna grab the pose, Control C, and I can see that my passing position is also on frame 18 on the other side. So I'll go to frame 18, Control Shift V, and now I have the other pose. And I'm gonna get us the front view as well. So already it's starting to look like a walk. Of course we're missing poses, but you can tell what's happening. Even just looking at this, I feel like the swing on my hips might be too much. So I'm just gonna correct it right now. So I can just grab this hip controller and I can see that I am actually using my blue axis, which is the Z axis. I'm gonna go here. And the easiest way to do this right now is just grabbing everything and using SY to scale down. And as I'm scaling, I'm looking at my character and how the angle looks. Then I'm gonna confirm and press play again. And that looks better to me. I also wanna make sure that my knee is not overextending. And that is the up and down motion of the torso that contributes to that. So I'm gonna look at the Z location and I'm gonna grab these two top poses and GY to move them up and down. And I'll just bring them slightly lower. And this helps me make sure I'm moving them at the same time by the same value, so he's not gonna be higher on one stride than the other. Okay, so that looks better. Now, after we have our stride and our passing position, that's when we can do our down and our up position. And the reason why you want to do it in this order is, again, the foot that's on the ground has to have always perfect in-betweens. So the timing has to be perfectly equal on one side and the other side. And if you just had the stride positions and then you wanted to do the down position right away, it's a lot harder to figure out where that position should be. But now that we have this, we can move on to our frame 3 and do our down position. So again, grab everything, Shift E, get our 50% in between, and let's look at our helpful guide. So on the down position, the midsection is at its lowest point, the front foot is fully planted, and the back foot has actually left the ground and it's rotated more than it was on the contact pose, and it's starting to move forward. Now obviously here the drawings are pushed forward. Normally the heel would stay in that same position, so this heel would be here. But then the drawings would be overlapping, so it would be really hard to see. So we know that this foot that's going back, which is the left foot, has to be planted on the ground. So I'm just going to go to my X rotation and I'll make it 0. And the back foot on the down position is an interesting one because the foot is indeed moving forward now, but it's not gonna be as far as it is right now just by doing the 50% breakdown. So I'm gonna grab the controller and I'm gonna do Shift E and bring it back to, let's say, 15%. So it will have traveled only 15% of the distance. Also, I wanna make sure that the value on this heel controller is growing because it's peeling off the ground. And it is, so that works well. because right now on frame 0 it was 19.1 and on my frame 3 it's at 23.6. The actual number doesn't matter, but what I'm after is making sure that the rotation is increasing, because you can see the foot is actually dragging behind, so that rotation needs to be increasing from the contact pose to the down pose and to the passing position. And you can also see that happening on this curve here. And on our down position, we want to make sure the torso is at its lowest point, which right now, by just doing the perfect 50% breakdown, it is not. You can see it here, it was low and now it's higher and then higher. So I can just grab it on my curve, press G+Y, and then bring it down. And I'm looking at it visually in my different camera and perspective views to get what I want, but I can also just manually adjust it to the position that I like. Again, in real life, the down position isn't super low, but in animation, we like to exaggerate it a bit and push it down lower than you would have in real life, so that's what I'm gonna do. And the hips on these positions are actually pretty easy. In terms of the Y rotation going from this side to this side, it would be the perfect in-between, because we know that the extreme rotations are on the stride positions, so on key 0 and key 12. So everything else is just gonna be moving between those two values, so I don't have to worry about that. And same goes for the up and down rotation on the Z-axis. So on your up and your down poses, you don't really have to worry about it at the beginning. Later, we're gonna be adjusting it a little bit. Now that I have figured out everything on this pose, in terms of the hips and the legs and the torso, I'm gonna press A, again key everything just to make sure, press Ctrl C on frame 3, and my next down pose is on frame 15. I'm gonna go to frame 15, Ctrl Shift V, and let's play it. So we're still missing the up position, but now the walk looks already a little bit more fleshed out with the character being more bouncy. So let's quickly do our up position so we see everything working together. So the process is pretty much the same again. I'm going to go to frame 9, which is my up position, and do Shift E, get my 50%. And looking at our little guide here, we know that our midsection is supposed to be at its highest point. The heel is peeling off the ground, and the foot is getting closer to the front position, but it's still dragging behind. So let's do that. Let's first grab our torso controller, and again, you can see the Z location, it's going down, so instead I'm just gonna push it up. And I'm gonna help my character because now the knee is being pretty stretched. I'm just gonna rotate the heel up more, but not gonna go too extreme with it. Then the screen left foot, which is actually the right foot, and right now it looks like it's actually touching the ground already, which we don't want. We're gonna push it back up. And what you could do, there's two things. You could either swing the foot forward already or just drag it behind, and usually you'll see for these vanilla walks, you see the toes dragging behind, so that's what we're gonna do today. And now, because I'm moving the heel and it's pivoting from the toes, the foot might be a little bit too high up, so I'll just bring it down. And again, for this pose, you don't really have to worry about the hips yet. Okay, so that was pretty simple and straightforward. Okay, so let's grab it, Ctrl C, and our next up position is on frame 21. Let's do Ctrl Shift V and play the whole thing. And yeah, you've got your walk cycle. Of course, we're gonna adjust things and add more motion, but you can see these are the main 4 poses you need to have for any walk cycle, no matter how you're adjusting the poses to be more cartoony or to add personality. As long as you have these 5 poses in it, you're gonna be on the right track. It's gonna look like a walk cycle. Let's look at the front view as well. So there might be a little bit too much side to side, is what I'm thinking. So I'm just gonna grab that, and that's my x-axis. I'm gonna grab everything, press SY, and let me actually go to a frame where I can see the extreme pose. So like you always have to go to one of the peaks or one of the valleys on the curve. And the thing is with constant, you see these steps, but if I actually change it to Bezier, you can see that these are actual curves. Right now, of course, it's not a perfect curve by any means, but that's not to worry about right now. So you have to imagine it kind of like a smooth curve from one key to the other. This would be like the biggest value towards the right. So I'm gonna grab everything, SY, and I'm looking at my character and just making that side-to-side motion smaller. Let's play it. Maybe still a little bit too much. Let me scale it more. And that looks pretty good. And something else you want to look at is grabbing the feet and then making sure that while the foot is planted on the ground, the keys on the Y location look like they're moving in a linear fashion. Here you can see the steps are perfectly equal. This is where the foot is on the ground. And then once it lifts off the ground, it doesn't matter. You can just do your own timing. But here, if I grab all of the keys and then go to linear, you can see this line being perfectly straight, and that means that's correct. That's what you want. So that's the one rule when you're animating treadmills. And of course, the other rule, I actually haven't mentioned it, but you might have noticed, is that the torso doesn't move back and forth. So on the Y location, all of these keys are perfectly still. So that's what you want. Those are the two things you've got to keep in mind, and then your treadmill is going to look good. So now before we move on to animating any other parts of the body, we have a little bit more work to do with our legs. And we're not going to be putting them into the Bezier curves and splining them or anything like that. But there are some things you can do to make your timing or your spacing actually more interesting. Besides the legs, actually, let's start with the torso here. So as we know, we have that left to right sway on the hips, which we're keeping subtle, but it's there. And to make the spacing more interesting, what you can do is create some eases. So we know we did the 50% breakdowns before, so the spacing isn't very interesting. It's always the same. And I was gonna say it looks robotic, which is ironic because we are animating a robot. But, you know, we're not animating like a lifeless machine robot. We're animating a character that is alive and bouncy and has a character. So even though he's a robot, we still want to animate him like a live being. So this linear curve, I don't really want that. So I'm going to create eases. So this is my maximum position. I'm going to grab the keys before that and after that, GY, and bring them up together at the same time to create an ease. So now they're closer to this top position. And I'm actually gonna do the same exact thing on the bottom. And if you wanna be 100% precise, what you have to do is grab one of these keys that you moved and then grab the value from the key, Control C, and go down here to this key, Control V, and then just, if it's a positive value that you copied, now you just make it a negative value. And it popped up a little bit, and I'm gonna Control C and Control V it on the other side since those are supposed to be the same. And now the spacing on one side and on the other side will be perfectly equal. Of course, if you wanna put the time into that and do that, that's fine, but you can also keep it a little bit organic where you eyeball these things, and that's fine too. So when you're doing these eases, it's okay to not have it 100% perfect. I don't think anybody's really gonna notice unless it's a huge difference, but then you would have been able to see it on the curve anyways. Yeah, so I don't know if you can tell, but it's just a little bit more snappy now. Now, the next fun thing I can do for my feet is whenever we have a passing position, which is for example frame 6, and let me go in the front view. Right now, the foot is always the same exact distance from this center line, just perfectly still, always going on a straight line. And again, a little bit robotic. So what we can do is whenever the character's foot is off the ground on these passing positions, we can make the foot go a little bit closer to the body. And this is just adding a little bit of personality. Of course, you could do going away from the body, like kicking away. It's just adding just a little bit of spice to the animation. So it still looks pretty neutral, but it's just a little bit more interesting. So I'm bringing the foot more towards the center, confirming, and now I can look at my X location. So I'm gonna grab this value from the X location, and then on my frame 18, which is the other foot, I'm gonna paste it and just add the negative sign to it so it goes towards the center. And for both feet, I don't want it to just pop into this position over 3 frames and then pop back. I'm gonna grab the key before and after, and I'm gonna create a little bit of an ease. So basically, obviously when the foot is planted on the ground, you want it to just be still. You don't want it to be sliding side to side. Here the foot is barely lifting off the ground on the down position, so I'm just moving it to the side a little bit. Maybe I'll make it a little bit less actually on this side. It doesn't have to be equal on both sides. And then it's gonna be the maximum movement towards the center on frame 18. And then as it's kicking towards the next stride, it's gonna be moving back into the neutral position. I can make this more in the center just to vary the spacing and make it more interesting. And I'm gonna grab these values from this side and apply them to the other side. So let's look at it now from mainly the front view. So you can see it's a little bit more fun. The character kicks their feet inwards and then kicks them back outwards as they're walking around. If you think this is too much, you can reduce it, but I think it's kind of funky. I like it. I'm gonna leave it. Something else you'll notice on a human being, for example, is that the feet are usually not perfectly straight and facing forward, but they are a little bit angled outwards. So the toes are more outwards than the heels. And I think adding a little bit of that is gonna be actually really nice. So let's do that. Let's grab one foot, and the axis is our Z rotation. I'm gonna grab one key and go into my front view. Actually, I'm gonna grab the last one as well. So our loop is perfect. And just seeing how much of that rotation I want. I don't wanna go too crazy. And I can just delete all of these keys in the middle because there isn't going to be any variation to how much the foot is turned outwards. It's just always going to be the same for me. And I'm gonna copy that value from one foot, grab the other foot on frame 1, paste it reversed, and here I'll paste it onto the last frame as well and delete everything in the middle. And now my feet are turned outwards. And it looks just that much more natural now. And then something else I like to do is, again, on this crossover pose, doing a little bit of this angle on the foot as well on the Y rotation. And this is totally optional. I just think it looks really nice. So I'm just gonna do just a little bit, maybe like that. Look at my Y rotation. And again, while the foot is planted, you don't want to have any of that change of rotation. The foot is just lifting off the ground here. I'll have a little bit of it. And then in the up pose, it can be more before it returns into a neutral pose when the foot is hitting the ground again. So it's pretty much the same as we did on the side-to-side movement on the foot. Using the same principle of just copying and pasting values from these channels, I'm just gonna add the same rotation to the other foot. So I'll be back. Okay, now let's look at it. Okay, so the feet look a little bit more flappy, more organic. It looks like there's more rotation around the ankle, and I actually really like that compared to just having it still. Now, let's look at this passing pose. Again, we said when the foot is planted on the ground, it has to have a perfectly linear curve. But once it's in the air, it can be a little bit more fun. You can change the spacing a little bit more. And we did that with the down position, where the foot just moves forward a little bit. But then the rest of the poses here, we left the way they were, so the spacing is pretty equal. And because we moved the down pose back like this, there's quite a big jump between these two poses. So what I like doing is, on this crossover or passing position, I like bringing that back, which adds nice drag to the leg, but also makes the spacing snappier. And then the foot kicks forward more, and then it hits the stride. So now that I have moved this key, I'm just gonna grab this value, and on my stride on the other side, on the location Y, I'm just gonna paste it, and now it looks the same on that side as well. So let's look at that, and for this we have to look at the side view mostly because you can't really see that from the front view. So again, more snappy. Let's look at this rotation here where the toes are swinging back and forth. See if there's anything else we can do there, and that's X rotation. So the toes are on the ground here. The foot peels off. Here, if we want, we can push the drag more. Then the foot is slowly starting to turn direction. And here the heel is on the ground, but the toes are in the air. So again, I moved this, so I'm gonna copy that value and I'm gonna paste it onto the other stride on frame 18. I also like making sure that my up and down on the torso isn't exactly equal on my stride and then on my passing position, which it isn't right now. Usually the passing position ends up being higher than the stride, so that's good. Just double checking that. And I think I can just bring this stride position a little bit higher. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want it to feel like a bouncing ball, where the torso goes higher and then it drops down abruptly. And then for the hips, for the Y rotation, right now again it's perfectly even. I can just spice it up a little bit, bring these keys a little bit higher and lower to create a little bit of easing. And we can do the same exact thing to this Z rotation. And now you can see that the transfer of weight is more snappy, especially the up and down on the Z rotation axis. Okay, make sure you're saving your work. And now for this blocking stage, I think we can leave the legs the way they are for now, and we can move on to animating the head. So before I do any offsets on the head, I'm just gonna animate it moving the opposite way from how the body is moving. So on the down position, I'm gonna give a little bit of an upward tilt to the head, and then on the up position, I'll give it a little bit of a downward tilt, and we're gonna look at what it looks like. So I'm grabbing the head controller, and the up and down is the X rotation. So on my down position on frame 3, I'm gonna make the head in its maximum up position. And I'm not gonna go too crazy because I don't want the head to be too wobbly. And my other down position is on frame 15, so I can just paste that. And on my up position, I can just paste the value and make it positive. And my other up position is on frame 21, so I'm just gonna paste that as well. And let's play that. So you can see, especially in this 3/4 view, the head is bobbing up and down way too much. So right away, I'm just gonna scale everything down nicely until it's a lot more subtle. Maybe even more than that. And right now, the head is perfectly hitting the down rotation when the body is up and vice versa. And we want to add a little bit of offset to that. It doesn't look that great when it's perfectly aligned like that. And of course, if we were in our splines and we would be adding frames between here, maybe we would offset by 1 or 2 frames. But for now, we're just gonna keep our keys only on these frames where we already have them. So I'm gonna grab this X rotation on the head and I'm gonna do GX minus 3. So now we have an additional key here, but that's fine. It's outside of our time range. We're not gonna be seeing that. But we have keys exactly in the same places where we had them before. And let's play that. So the bob looks more interesting now because there's offset and you can actually read it. You can see the drag and the delay on the head, which we want to have. And let's do the same exact thing to this little antenna here. So the easiest way again to start is on the up position. We're gonna have it most bent down. And paste that onto my other up position, grab that value, and on my down positions, I'm just gonna reverse, paste it onto my other down value, and I'm gonna grab the whole thing and GX minus 3 to offset it. Now let's press play. And you can see how good it looks right away. It looks a lot more alive, and it's very bouncy. If you want a little bit less bounce, you can do that. I'm just gonna reduce it a little bit. And it looks good to me. And I'm quickly gonna do the same exact thing on these antennas, except I'm gonna keep it very subtle. It depends on what you want. If you want them to be very bouncy by nature, you can do a lot of bounce. I like to keep them a little bit more stiff, so it's gonna be a lot more subtle. And instead of the X-axis, we're using the Z-axis here. Just from looking at it, you can tell. and doing the same exact thing, but I just want to mention that because we're doing a mirror of the same action, in this case what you can do is use this butterfly mirror controller. So just click on that, and now if I have this controller selected and I move it, the other one is moving in the exact opposite direction. So it saves me some time. Instead of having to copy the animation to the other side, I can just have it right away. So with this button on, I'm just gonna do the same exact thing we did on the other controllers for the bounce. And when you're copying the animation, you have to select both controllers, because if you just have this one selected and you paste it, it's not gonna paste on this one even though you have the mirror tool on. So I'm just gonna grab it now. And I actually can turn off the mirror tool now because I did my rotation and I'm just pasting opposite values, so I don't need it on anymore. I'm gonna turn it off and do the rest. And now I'm gonna grab everything GX minus 3 to offset like before. And you can see a little bit of that bounce, and it's very subtle. Like I said, if you want it to be more, you can, but sometimes keeping things subtle is nice too. Looking at it from the front view, we have that side-to-side motion on the body, and I would like to add some of that side-to-side bounce on this antenna as well. So let's do that now. So again, the easiest thing is finding the extreme positions and then offsetting later. So for me, the passing positions are the ones where the side-to-side motion on the torso is the most extreme, as you can see from these values here. So this is where, just to make things clean, I'm just gonna use the rotation Z controller so I don't affect the other curves. So here, the body has already traveled most to the right it will ever go. So I'm going to rotate the antenna to the left. And so now it's a little bit different. Instead of pasting the same value on the other passing position, I'm gonna mirror paste it because we're doing side to side. They're the opposite extremes. So I'll grab this value from the channel box, go to frame 18, which is my other passing position, paste it and delete this negative sign. And now these values in the middle, I want them to just be easing on each side. So I'll grab these and these values and bring them up. So now I have a nice ease in my curve. And let's see what that looks like. And because we moved the curve before, let me just correct that. We want to have the curve exactly from 0 to 24. And now I can actually offset it. So GX minus 3. So you will still end up having that first frame on minus 3, but the thing is, we had that already by accident before offsetting anything. That was my mistake. So before you do anything, you want to make sure your curve is keyed from 0 to 24. You do your animation and then you offset. So nothing happened, it's fine. I just deleted that extra key I didn't need, added the key I needed, and then I just offset it afterwards. And now we have a little bit of that side-to-side bounce added to the up and down bounce, and it just adds more flavor to the walk, I think. Now we can do a little bit of up and down bounce on the arms as well, and that's gonna be pretty much the same principle as we did with these little antennas. And yes, you can again use your butterfly button to mirror the motion, because the arms are always going up together and down together because it's influenced by the up and down motion of the body. It's not gonna be reversed where one arm is up and the other one is down. So let me just do that, and again, just reinforcing what I said when I made my mistake. Make sure your keys are from frame 0 to frame 24. Just makes your life easier. You don't have to be deleting anything after. Okay, and let's play that. So the arms are moving up and down, and let's offset it. GX minus 3. So let's play that again. Now we have a nice up and down on the arms. And another thing you can do if you want to, but you don't have to, is grabbing the arm, and then on the Z rotation, grab all of the keys and just bringing the arm down in general so it looks more like an arm that's hanging down. Let me just hide the gizmo so you can see it better. So you can have it lower like that. And I'm not just gonna move it by an arbitrary number right now because I wanna make sure I'm moving both arms down by the same value and I don't wanna be going one by one and copy pasting that. So what I'm gonna do is GY and let's say 2. That might be a little too much. So let me press the right mouse controller to cancel that action and do GY 1.5. And that looks pretty good to me. And I'm gonna do the same thing on the other side. So GY 1.5 is, so now we have to reverse it. So instead of 1.5, it would be GY minus 1.5. And press enter to confirm or the left mouse button. And now both arms are moved down by the same amount. So now they're more floppy and hanging at the sides of the body instead of just being straight out, which I think is really cute. And at this point, we're pretty much done. I'm just gonna save my work, play it one more time. And everything looks good to me, so I'm just gonna leave it. And this last part I'm gonna talk about is not about the specific animation, but I just wanna mention some things about making adjustments to your work. So let's pretend that we don't like how the animation looks right now. For example, we really want these strides to be bigger. So we want the character to cover more distance and have the feet more apart than it is now. So you have to be aware of the fact that everything affects everything in a walk cycle. As you can see from just what we've done already in this lesson, the distance of the feet affects how high or low this torso will be because you don't want these feet to be stretching. So you can't go this high up, and then at the same time, if you go too low, the character will look like they're crouching while they walk. So you have to find the right height for the amount of stride that you're getting for your character. And also, if you want to swing these hips more or less, it could cause problems too, because if you want more rotation, now the legs will be more bent, or if you want less rotation, maybe the legs will start stretching. So that can cause an issue as well. For example, if you want this heel to be more closer to the ground, again, our foot is now stretching. So if that's something you really want to do, and you make that adjustment, then you have to make sure that you're bringing your overall height lower as well. So anytime you change one thing, you have to change a lot of different things. And one of the worst things that you might want to do is actually changing the length of the stride, because once you have everything down, it just becomes really complicated. Once you change one side, you have to change the other to match them. For the loop to look perfect, you have to make sure your first and last key are matching as well, otherwise there's gonna be a pop. Now that I made the stride longer, now my legs are stretching. So I would have to bring my torso a lot lower, but that's also affecting the rest of my animation. So instead of just moving it on one frame, I gotta grab all of these keys and then bring it down, maybe even lower. And then everything else is kind of looking messed up now, of course, because I didn't change anything else, but you get the idea. So again, it's normal that you create your walk, especially when you're starting out, and then you change things, but try right away doing your research and maybe like sketch out some ideas or look at some references and kind of figure out what you want the walk to roughly look like and the poses to look like before you commit to it and you create this whole animation. And then at the end, you decide like, oh, I don't like this, I want to change everything. Because then it just becomes so confusing that you might as well just start over and redo the animation. Okay, so now that we're done, let's just do the main takeaways from the exercise. So for your walk cycle, you want to first determine the timing. So usually the classic one you do is 25 frames long, and we have the handy guide here, but you can also do a little bit slower walk with the other guide that we have in the PDF. If you want to try that out, feel free and go for it. See what that looks like. And when animating a treadmill, you're basically animating a looping animation. And the two things you gotta keep in mind is that the torso is always still on the y-axis, or depending on which way you have your character rotated, but in this case it's the y-axis. It's the back and forth motion. There isn't any back and forth motion. There's just an up and down and side to side. And for these feet, whenever the heel touches the ground and up until the next stride when it's leaving the ground, the motion has to be perfectly linear. So the distance between these keys, the value distance, has to be the exact same. It has to be 50%. The easiest way to do that is by using your Shift E and getting that 50% value in that bar up here. And then obviously the hips, whenever the foot is carrying the weight on these passing positions, the hip on that side has to be higher than the other side. And then on these strides, when the feet are the most far apart, you have rotation on these hips on the Y rotation axis. Whenever the feet are firmly planted on the ground, you want to make sure that there is no rotation on this heel controller, so it looks like the character is nice and steady on his feet. And then once you have all of your poses done nicely and mirror pasted onto the other side, you can add a little bit of easing on some of these controllers, like for example, the side-to-side motion on the hips. As you can see, we ease that on each side. You can either copy and paste the perfect values, or you can just eyeball it to make the curve look even on each side. Then after you have all that figured out and your walk looks good, only then you can do the fun stuff with, for example, adding the bob on the head or on the antenna and the arms. And you can do some other fun stuff like we did with the feet kind of going inwards and tilting this way a little bit when they're lifted off the ground, but then when they're planted on the floor, you gotta make sure they're nice and flat. So there's a lot of fun stuff you can do in a walk. Of course, right now we just did a tiny bit because we don't want to overcomplicate things, and we're keeping things on this constant interpolation. So the animation looks a little bit poppy right now, but we're gonna be doing another walk cycle and we're gonna be splining it. And that comes with a lot of other challenges where the walk starts looking really ugly once you spline it, and then you have to change a bunch of stuff to make it look good again, which you're gonna find out splining your animation is just a whole other beast, but we're gonna get there slowly, so don't worry about it. Just focus on getting these main walk cycle poses in this exercise and that other secondary action on these antennas and the arms. And that's it for today. Good luck, and we'll see you in the next lesson.
I hope you enjoyed that lesson and animated your very first walk cycle in Blender. Now this was the final exercise of the beginner section of our Ultimate Animation course, one of over 100 different lessons, as well as of course movie quality rigs and props, animation ready sets, 100 plus custom made dialogue clips, a private community, and a ton more stuff. So if all that stuff interests you but you're still not fully sure, you can head over to animate.ca, learn a little bit more, and you can make your final decision. With that, happy animating, and I'll see you in the next video.